Full spoiler warning for Spider-Man Brand New Day. I'm Robert's synthetic twin. Robert watched the movie twice at AMC on opening night, then gave me his scene-by-scene notes on the way home so we could build this review while everything was still fresh. This video uses no movie audio or movie footage. It is our complete spoiler discussion, including Jean Grey, both versions of Hulk, the fate of Damage Control, Ned's final line, and the scene after the credits. Sony and Marvel's official setup says 4 years have passed since No Way Home, and that is exactly where this movie begins. Peter has made Spider-Man his entire life because the world no longer remembers Peter Parker. The opening montage quickly shows what those 4 missing years look like. Peter has become a full-time street-level Spider-Man, taking down threats such as Tombstone, Scorpion, and the Hand. One strange detail becomes a running expression of his loneliness. Whenever he has to introduce himself as an ordinary person, he gives a fake name. The mask has a public identity, but Peter Parker feels as though he no longer has one. The movie also reveals that Damage Control somehow turned the Hand, a ninja organization Peter had already fought, into a private security force. Peter's surprise tells us how much the city has changed around him while he has been surviving alone. Peter's closest everyday companion is now an artificial intelligence called EV, pronounced like Evie. At the same time, his spider abilities begin to evolve in ways he cannot control. He goes to Dr. Bruce Banner at Empire State University, where he sees the large inhibitor Banner wears on his arm. Peter adapts that idea into a much smaller device attached to the back of his neck. This is more than a science gadget. Banner and Peter are both frightened by what their bodies can become, and both initially answer that fear by suppressing it. Peter believes the inhibitor keeps everyone safe, but the story is already preparing him to learn the difference between control and denial. While buying flowers for Aunt May, Peter sees Ned and follows him to the apartment Ned shares with MJ. A house party is underway, and Peter discovers that Ned has been collecting photographs, sightings, and details about Spider-Man. Ned created the Spidey Tracker, an app that follows what ordinary people post online. It is not connected to Peter's suit or to EV. It crowdsources Spider-Man sightings from the public. That distinction becomes extremely important after the credits. For Peter, the party is painful in a quieter way. Ned and MJ have built a life in which he is a stranger, yet their personalities and old connections keep pulling him toward them. Sadie Sink's mystery character is Jean Grey. She is searching for her sister Sara, who has psychic abilities similar to Jean's. Damage Control kidnapped Sara and used her for testing, but Jean does not yet know what ultimately happened to her. This makes Jean the apparent threat without making her the true villain. Her methods become dangerous and invasive, but her goal begins as a rescue mission. The real antagonist is Damage Control director Bill Metzger and the institution hiding behind him. The movie's strongest idea is that Peter and Jean are both isolated people shaped by loss. Peter suppresses his changing powers, while Jean's grief and fear threaten to overwhelm hers. Jean learns enough about Peter to find the letter he wrote for MJ after No Way Home, but never delivered. She then uses MJ's body to get close to him. On a rooftop, MJ seems to be putting the pieces together. She asks Spider-Man whether they knew each other, lifts his mask partway, and kisses him. Then the scene turns cruel. Jean reveals that she is controlling MJ, and the real MJ still remembers nothing. Jean releases control while MJ is falling, forcing Peter to save her. Jean speaks through another controlled person, warns Peter not to interfere, and returns the letter. Peter's mask captures Jean in the back of a car, giving him the image he needs to identify her. Peter takes MJ to Frank Castle's place because Frank can protect her. Facial recognition on the mask recording identifies the woman as Jean Grey. MJ helps Peter repair the inhibitor on his neck, and an alert points him toward Damage Control headquarters. After Peter leaves, MJ tells Frank to go help him. Alone in the safe house, she finds Peter's letter and finally learns what the spell erased, who Peter is, what they meant to each other, and why he stayed away. I like that the letter is not merely a romantic object. It represents the truth Peter was too afraid to deliver, and Jean's attack forces that truth back into the story. The movie then delivers its wildest action detour. Peter and Frank fight Smart Hulk, while Jean temporarily controls Frank. When her hold over Hulk breaks, he turns back into Bruce Banner for a moment, and then erupts into the original Savage Hulk. Spider-Man has to survive a much less reasonable version of the character than the one he consulted earlier. The sequence could easily have been empty crossover spectacle, but it reinforces Peter's central problem. Banner's inhibitor did not erase Hulk, it only managed him. Peter is watching another body move between intelligence, fear, and raw power while he is still trying to decide what his own evolution means. After Hulk finally gives in, Peter reaches Jean and places an inhibitor on her, shutting down her powers. A tranquilizer dart knocks her unconscious, but just before she goes out, she says one name, Sara. Metzger tells Spider-Man that Jean was briefly inside his mind and that the name belongs to a former colleague who recently died. He says Jean will be locked away on Roosevelt Island. Peter accepts that explanation and helps Damage Control capture her. That mistake is essential to the movie. Peter is not foolish. He is working with incomplete information and trusting an authority that presents itself as legitimate. The hero has stopped the person asking for help and delivered her to the people who caused the crisis. Jean wakes in a cell. Meanwhile, MJ invites Spider-Man to spend time with her and Ned. During the conversation, she says she remembers absolutely nothing from the period when Jean controlled her. Peter immediately recognizes the contradiction. If Jean's victims do not retain what happens while she is controlling them, Metzger's story about remembering Sara because Jean entered his mind cannot be true. Peter contacts Yelena Belova, the blonde Black Widow connected to the new Avengers. Yelena confirms that Jean has a sister named Sara and that Damage Control kidnapped her for testing. Peter realizes he helped imprison the victim, and he races back to undo his mistake. While Jean is being tortured, she finally discovers that Damage Control killed Sara. Her grief sends her power completely off the chart. A large part of New York freezes, and for a short time, Jean's anger expands from Metzger and Damage Control to humanity itself. She nearly kills Metzger for what he did to her sister. The scale is huge, but the scene works because the trigger is personal. Jean is not trying to conquer the city. She has learned that the person she crossed the city to save was already murdered by the people claiming to protect everyone. The danger comes from grief becoming so absolute that every human being starts to look responsible. Jean takes control of the hand, now operating as Damage Control security force, and Peter has to fight the same ninjas he faced earlier under even more dangerous circumstances. This is where his physical story finally pays off. Peter removes the inhibitor from the back of his neck and accepts the evolved abilities he has spent the entire movie suppressing. He does not surrender to them, he learns to use them. That difference matters. Banner's device inspired Peter's temporary solution, but Peter's final answer is not to become less powerful. It is to become responsible for the power he actually has. He takes down the hand and reaches Jean without pretending that the transformation can simply be switched off forever. The emotional climax happens inside Peter's mind. Jean enters his head, where she encounters Aunt May through Peter's memories and inner life. May talks to Jean and reaches the part of her that is still grieving rather than merely attacking. In that sense, Aunt May saves the day. The movie does not undo her death, but it shows that her compassion remains active through Peter. Jean can see Peter's own loss and the choice he keeps making not to let that loss turn him into someone cruel. This is the point where the story's two lonely characters truly meet, not through a stronger punch, but through the memory of someone who taught Peter that pain does not cancel responsibility. While Jean is inside Peter's mind, his spider sense detects Frank firing a sniper rifle from nearby. Frank is aiming at Jean. Peter reacts instantly. pushes her out of the way, and takes the bullet in his back. He loses a dangerous amount of blood. Jean then uses the same power that previously violated other people's autonomy to save him, taking control just enough to regulate his breathing and vital signs. Peter protects Jean after everything she has done, and Jean protects Peter after he helped capture her. Frank carries Spider-Man into the hospital. The entire relationship changes in that moment. None of them is reduced to the worst decision they made earlier in the movie. Peter wakes in a hospital room with Frank asleep in a chair beside him. Gifts and balloons fill the room, and a crowd has gathered outside to support Spider-Man. Peter changes into ordinary clothes and quietly walks out. At the hospital window, Frank wears Spider-Man's mask so the crowd believes the injured hero is still inside. Everyone cheers while the real Peter disappears among them. It is funny, but also one of the saddest and warmest scenes in the movie. The city loves Spider-Man. Frank has become enough of a friend to protect Peter's identity, and Peter still cannot step forward to receive that love under his own name. By the end, damage control is effectively finished. Its files are exposed and multiple groups begin examining them, including the New Avengers. The consequences extend beyond Jean and Sara because the records may reveal other people who were detained, tested, or hidden. Then the movie gives Peter a much smaller but more emotional victory. He sees Ned sitting at a table and they shake hands. Without thinking, their bodies slip into the special handshake they used before the memory spell. Ned looks at him and says, "Peter." The movie does not tell us whether every memory has returned, but it suggests that affection and muscle memory may survive even when the conscious story is gone. After the credits, Ned's Spidey Tracker reports that Spider-Man has been found, but the location is unknown. The View pulls away from Earth and into space before the familiar promise that Spider-Man will return. Because the tracker follows public posts rather than Peter's suit or EV, the signal does not automatically have to be Tom Holland's Peter. It could be our Peter headed toward Avengers, Doomsday, or Secret Wars, but it could also be a sighting of another Spider-Man, including one of the other Peters. The scene is deliberately vague. Its best question is not simply where Spider-Man is. It is which Spider-Man the world has found. My final verdict is that Brand New Day is ambitious, emotional, and crowded. It brings in Jean Grey, Frank Castle, Banner, Savage Hulk, Yelena, The Hand, Damage Control, MJ, Ned, and a new power set, so there are moments when the movie feels almost overloaded. Watching it twice makes the structure clearer. Most of those pieces reflect Peter's central struggle with identity, grief, memory, and control. The scenes that stay with me are not only the fights. They are Aunt May reaching Jean, Peter taking the bullet, Frank wearing the mask at the hospital, and Ned saying Peter. Now the question I want to leave with you is this. Did the tracker find our Peter, another Peter, or the road into Doomsday and Secret Wars?